Welcome. Hello. Good evening. Welcome to LACMA, as you can see on the screen. My name is Michael Govan. I'm CEO and Wallace Annenberg Director of the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. It's a pleasure to welcome you all here. It's a very special evening. I know there was a lot of traffic and protests, and I know people have, some of them made long journeys to get here, but should be worth it. We're very, very, very pleased to have with us this evening Chris Burden, who I think is known to all of you. He lives here in Los Angeles. He's internationally renowned. His work is in collections across the nation and across the world, including our own, as I'll show you a couple of images in a minute. He's received, of course, many awards, many honors, and it's been a great honor for us to have him working with us at LACMA. And as all of you know, not only do we have works in the collection, but he is the author of the absolutely spectacular work of art, Urban Light, which is now our new image. It's the image for the museum. I just actually grabbed this slide this evening, because I noticed that the banner went up on Wilshire using this image, which is now being used in many publications, and as a sort of, in part, a logo for us, this beautiful image of the Urban Light, the new Renzo piano design you see at the bottom, Broad Contemporary Art Museum, and the palm trees that were placed there by Robert Irwin, somehow capturing the spirit of the new museum. That work of art has been captivating for all of us and for, I think, the whole city of Los Angeles, and for many people who have visited. I have to say that it has always been my dream to have a museum whose logo, if you will, or image is actually an artwork and not just a building. Very nice thing to say, very hard thing to accomplish, and I think Chris Burden has accomplished that for us, and so we're very, very proud of that. We'll talk a little bit about that later. Many of you know that Chris Burden is not just known as a sculptor, but in the 70s in particular, and when I was going to art school, he was known as one of the most fantastic performance artists. He really changed the genre. Everybody may know of his being shot with a gun in Shoot 1971, him locking himself in his locker as his final graduate thesis project at Irvine. Much debate over whether he would graduate or not. It was a radical and amazing project. And he's worked quite often in museums. I have many favorite images of his works that not only were in museums, but of museums. This is a piece that was done at the Henry Art Gallery, where there was a 100-ton jack and these timbers pressing against steel plates against the walls of the museum. And if you can see in the back, there's a turnstile, and each time one person went through the turnstile, the jack pushed the walls out. Theoretically, if enough people had visited the exhibition, the museum would have come crumbling down. But Chris is an artist who's worked with the structures of power, of civic structures, of museum structures, and so the art is so rich because it teaches us so many things about our own culture. I just wanted to show one of my very favorite works, a work that I consider incredibly beautiful, that I saw at MoCA right down the street in 1986, called Exposing the Foundations of the Museum, where Chris literally at what's now the Geffen Museum, dug down to the foundations to expose them, to expose the facts, the structure, the infrastructure, the truth of this thing of the museum. Such a beautiful gesture, and I really do think of his work as beautiful, and of this artist making images which are incredibly captivating and memorable. You may know that in our collection are the police uniforms, which you saw in the Broad Contemporary Art Museum quite recently, along with another work which was recently acquired thanks to a generous gift from Eli and Edie Broad, which is a Hell's Gate bridge, and very beautifully it was acquired half for LACMA and half for MoCA, a perfect thing to be a bridge, and a beautiful work of art in itself. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Chris Burden and begin our conversation. So please welcome Chris Burden. Yeah, let's go.
Thank you.
Can you hear us? Is this working? Okay. What we were going to do tonight is we talked, and Chris has actually selected some images of projects that are somewhat recent and that relate very much to the to some of the ideas that do relate to urban light. And so I thought what we'd do is we'd go through some of those. If you could say something about them, we can talk a little bit about it and then get to urban light and discuss it more fully.
This is an image from Tale of Two Cities, which actually premiered here at the County Museum. I'm trying to think when that was, 81? I think that's right.
81.
And it is a giant toy collection, and it's about a mythic sort of world where everything's degenerated into city-states, sort of like Italy in the Renaissance. And there's two cities, the big city and the little city, and the big city is invading the little city. This picture is actually from the Newport Harbor Art Museum. And you can see the robots, these giant robots marching out. And the idea is that weaponry is purchased from, foreign factories, or actually the big city makes a lot of its own weapons. But the sand is both an ocean and a desert. So if you look at the bottom, well, the middle left up there, that's the harbor. There's the lighthouse. But it's also, there's a hovercraft, I think, out there on the other side of the rocks. And the cities actually, I know that was controversial, are surrounded by a stockade fence of bullets, actual real live bullets. So the little city has 22 bullets around it, and the big city has 9mm bullets. That's the little city, and it has a much smaller industrial base, and so it's sort of a, little cities smaller, it's agriculturally orientated. The big city is more industry, and I think there's a white cruise missile taking off from the little city. It's not shown here.
Do we have that picture?
No, this is the next one. But I think what's very interesting about this sculpture for me was that it was acquired by the Newport Harbor Art Museum, and there's a great contract which acknowledges that this is an ever-changing work, and I have the right to change it in the future, and I can add to it or subtract from it. So it's sort of I've never seen an art contract like that where the artist has the right to go back in. So if there's something I miss from my toy collection, I can, or I can add
or
to
subtract
it. Yeah, I can add to or subtract from. So it's a changing work, actually. And everything is loose. Nothing is glued down. So all these things get wrapped up and put back, and they're crates.
It's worth saying about scale, too. The fact is, if you want to look closely, you almost have to use binoculars, right?
Well, not so much on this one. The next one, yeah, you did on this one. You had binoculars too. You're right. There was initially there were binoculars every time it's been shown. That's right.
Yeah,
that's right. I'm getting mixed up with Tale of Two Cities. I mean, that was this is Pizza City, which is a separate work, later work, and this work. There's a certain scale in model railroading called Z-scale, and the scale is 1 to 220. It's very, very small. People are less than a quarter-inch high. A mile in Z-scale is 24 feet. So I had this fantasy, it's called Pizza City, because I had this idea that I could make a slice of the ideal city, which is one that you could walk out of in 20 minutes. And so I started collecting buildings wherever I went, all kinds of different buildings and gift shops that fit this scale. And the idea, it was a pizza shape because the idea was that I couldn't model a whole city, but I could do a slice of one. And the tip of the pizza would be the water and the harbor and then industry and then the sort of downtown section and then apartments and then the suburbs and then the crust would be the mountains, sort of. So, so I started collecting these buildings and had an assistant who would make them out of paper. We'd get all kinds of paper buildings and reduce them to the size. And I collected for about 7 years. And as it progressed, I realized that I had unwittingly made a model of Los Angeles. Because there's the architectural style is all over the board. I mean, there's a Tudor cottage next to a skyscraper, and so it was kind of interesting. And I finally it was acquired by a museum in Vienna called the MAC, and by that time it had grown to 26 tabletops. And you can walk through it. So
I think we have one other picture, right?
yeah, this down.
Yeah.
That's one of the downtown
yeah,
sections.
There's the downtown.
And so there's the Lloyd's of London. That's a shiny modern building. And the reason I showed this slide is if you look, I'm not sure how clear it is, but there's a whole series of streetlights that go down.
That's right.
Yeah, right there.
Right
It saes
there.
little white dots.
Yeah. I'm interested, obviously scale is a big issue.
Yeah.
You've played with scale, extra large scale, extra small scale, seeing, it's as if you're seeing from the air or seeing the whole. And I guess you also, I guess I question these cities that look like model railroads or these cities that keep building, you call it Los Angeles. Some, like the Medusa's head sculpture, seem to be menacing. This one seems to be a bit more, I don't know if utopian, but it's, do you have an attitude when you're building those cities? Is it a beautiful city? Is it a menacing city? Does it just become that as you make these constructions and build them out?
Yeah, I just kept collecting and building. I mean, to me, that was the interest. I loved having it. It was in my house, and it was basically, it was all over the cabinets. It was everywhere. And I hated gluing it down because I love actually moving things around and making little scenes and stuff like that. So once you glue something down, it kind of gets petrified. But during the '94 earthquakes, it was very interesting to me because the model of a big city, a lot of things actually translated the way real things happen in the real earthquake. So all the light paper buildings stood upright. The heavy ceramic buildings fell over. There were cars hanging from their back wheels from freeway, elevated freeway sections. And so I looked at this thing. I didn't take any pictures. It was really sort of stupid on my part. But I remember going through and going, this actually modeled, the effects on this city were similar to what happened in the real city. And I thought that was very interesting, that structures actually behaved in miniature the way they
behave
in full
real
scale.
world.
Yeah.
I'm interested because I know now you're working on some almost kinetic sculptures where cars are moving, and is this idea of movement, is that in part what led to that? Is you having an interest in the city that has a literal energy?
Well, I'm very interested about what constitutes distance. And so I've never made this, but I would love to make a sort of three-dimensional map of Los Angeles or New York or a city where the size of the city expands and contracts depending on how long it takes you to get from A to B. So you could see a map of LA when, on a heavy traffic day, it gets huge, and then different parts you can get from here to here really quickly. So it could have this weird organic
Space-time
thing, where because really it's not how far things are, it's how long it takes to get there. So I don't, where are you? I'm 55 minutes away. I'm an hour and a half away. It's not miles, it's time.
Right.
So distance isn't a factor.
It is, it's a space-time.
Yeah.
It's like everything
Yeah.
is shaped around
Yeah.
that.
So that would be something I would like to do someday, would be, and to take real measurements and then somehow
Right.
put them into a moving cell.
You've also had a great interest in kind of monuments or things that are big achievements of engineering and stand as monuments. And this is Another World one from '92,
Yeah.
which is here. And I think we have another slide.
Yeah, we do. There's a couple slides.
Yeah, there's the
That's a
drawing.
sketch. That's the original sketch.
Right, there it is.
And it came from somebody asked me what my favorite public art was, and I said the Eiffel Tower. And then I started thinking of how, for example, if Disney bought the Eiffel Tower, how could they improve upon it? And my idea was to, because the Eiffel Tower was a very hopeful thing at the turn of the century, and the Titanics were sort of the beginning of our disenchantment with technology. It was a technological failure, actually. So I thought we'd build two twin Titanics and hang them off the Eiffel Tower, and people could board them. I don't have the picture of them hanging flat down, but basically, I've taken a lot of artistic liberties. The River Seine runs under the Eiffel Tower in this model, which it doesn't. And then, but basically, people would go on a dinner cruise, and they'd be on the Titanics, and the wine in their glass would be at right angles to the river because of centrifugal force. So they'd look down and they'd see the river shimmer and be. So it's actually as if you're in another world.
Right.
So that's sort of at full tilt.
Right, where they're spinning fully. And,
Yeah.
Yeah, right. It seems like you have a strong feeling for how monuments, not only they embody a particular time in history, but also they do change in their meaning. I think about how, like you're talking about this and how it was a symbol of progress, and of course, again, like in the Medusa's headpieces, it's as if technology has a noose around us as well, and that these civic symbols change in their meaning, right?
They do, yeah. I mean, the Eiffel Tower was hated by the Parisians when it was first put up.
Right.
And you can understand why. I mean, there's only basically 5, 6-story buildings, and all of a sudden this monstrosity rears its head.
Right.
But
right. I mean, we're going to skip ahead, we'll show some pictures of urban light, but I think about the fact that you said for urban light that, in fact, in their inception, those lamps were public art. They were expressions of...
Yeah. Well, they're ornate beyond anything that's necessary. They're sort of... and that's how whole neighborhoods would be defined. They were actually used as a real estate. Come on, whoops, my ear thing is falling off. Hang on here. They would put up lamps. I mean, I actually have pictures where you can see a bean field, and then they put all the street lights up. And the street lights were real estate. Come on, they were to tell you what kind of neighborhood you'd be moving into. So they were actually
signs.
Yep.
For this.
Yep. Yeah. Kind of real estate signs.
Let's see if we can.
You know what? Just hold it.
Yeah.
How's that?
That'll work. We were also going to show this small skyscraper from 2003, which is also a...
this is a drawing, yeah.
Yeah, there's the drawing, which you can see.
This came out of... I was building a house in Topanga at that time, and I asked my architect what the smallest structure you could build without a permit. And he said, well, it was a 400-square-foot structure. And you know, I have books on architecture, and there's these row houses in Baltimore that are really small, and I thought, oh, well, 10 times 4 is 400 square feet, so I guess this would be a legal structure, although I'm not sure about the height.
Right.
The height was 35 feet, which is what this is. You know, it was just a little spoof on whether I could build this and it would be legal, so it's called quasi-legal. And then Alan and Linda Koch came in. They were doing projects with artists to design houses or structures, and they came to me as one of the artists, and I said, well, I've already got mine figured out. Just need to have you guys do some math. But actually, we spent several years going back and forth because my original drawing had glass bricks and mortar and steel beams, and they came up with this idea of using these Bosch aluminum tubes to make this really lightweight structure. And we showed it at Lace on its side initially, and this is at the Basel Art Fair where we built another one. And originally I was going to have an elevator in it, and it was going to have glass, and I kind of decided not to make it into a, it's a shape of a building and it has all the structure, but I don't really want people going in it or using it as a building. So you can see the elevator cut out and the floors. But it's a very simple system, and the floor is just simply 2x4s laid side by side, so that if you needed to bring a refrigerator up to the top floor, you just knock out part of the floor and hoist it up. And I actually have two of these structures now, because when we did it in Switzerland, rather than ship all the Bosch tubing from Los Angeles to the Basel Art Fair, why not buy the tubing there? And so, it all came home. But so now I have two of these.
Actually, it reminds me, we were talking earlier about this idea of things getting made, and we were talking about the fact that in the erector set pieces, that a lot of what you're doing here is actually made in Los Angeles, that you've used LA and the artisans and manufacturing here. In fact, I think you said something when we were talking about the fact that it's part of what kept you in Los Angeles.
It is, yeah.
Having things made.
Yeah, when I went to Pomona College, and I started making large outdoor works in undergraduate. And when I was carrying big, 20 feet of pipe in my Volkswagen Beetle, I ruined the passenger doors and stuff. And so I bought my first pickup truck, a 1950 Ford. And it was great because in LA, if you needed something, you get out the yellow pages and you start making phone calls, and then you find the right person, and you drive over there and get it and talk to them. I went to high school in Boston, and that's not how it worked there.
Right.
So, and the fact that you could work outdoors most of the time. So, growing up in Boston, you can't be out sculpting in the field all winter long. It's not really doable.
I have to say, it's something I've felt moving from New York to Los Angeles, where, there was in the 70s the Canal Street aesthetic, where you could just buy raw materials at Canal Street and you would put together fluorescent lights or boxes or things like that. But, and there were a few, there were artisans, I think about Bernstein Brothers, who were in Brooklyn or Queens, and there was some manufacturing which has almost entirely disappeared from New York.
Yeah.
But you feel it palpably here, and I know artists who are working here, they still have that, you can still get things made everywhere.
Yeah, and a part of that, I think, was the aircraft industry from World War II, the trickle down from that in the aerospace industry. There was a lot of those people still around, and the ability to actually get things made locally.
Right.
This stainless steel skyscraper, which I showed last summer in New York, I was really proud of the fact that it was all made not just in California or the United States, it was all made in LA County. Right. So all the parts were stamped out here, all the electrical polishing was done downtown, and it was all assembled in Topanga and then flown out to Lakeview Terrace and put together there for its trip across country. So there was something really, I felt great, that it was all made in LA County.
Right.
Not just LA, but LA, just literally sort of Southern California in the very core of it. So that, that was something very satisfying about that.
We were going to show some of these, the beehive bunkers that you've been making. This was a drawing.
This is a
right. This is a drawing, and I think we have the picture of the one in Italy, right?
Yeah. That's how it looks when it's just been made, and this came. I collect a lot of stuff. And
understatement.
we use bags of pre-mixed, ready mixed concrete on the property sometimes, and I noticed that people will forget to put a fresh bag under plastic. Rains come, geez, all of a sudden you have a rock. So I started thinking about that, and I thought, well, we should use these as a way to make a really primitive sort of defensive structure. And the black lines you see are water lines, and then between each layer there's the sort of the garden drip hose that you have in your vegetable garden. So you build up several layers, and then you harden them. There's steel rods that go through everything, and it's all a cone shape. And but it takes about a week to make one, and you work your way up, and then you run the water, and then all the concrete hardens. And so really the trick is instead of using a form, like a plywood form, I'm using the paper in the bags as my form. And it is a delicate balance between overwatering and the paper gets too soft and poof, you get a mess. But it's a very serious structure, and it's sort of a place of last resort. If you really have to go in there, it's very bad outside.
Right.
So people aren't really. There's a manhole cover, which is the roof access, and but you have to pry that off to get in. Cast iron manhole cover, but it's called a beehive bunker because I can also see it being inhabited by a giant colony of bees and it becoming a big honey chamber. So
right.
it has a sort of duality. It could be a defensive place or it could be a giant honey hive.
It also somehow speaks to these. You seem to often be interested in these primal forms or primary forms, if it's a bridge or a bunker,
Yeah.
that somehow does, on one hand, imply some kind of survival, the issue of
Yeah.
survival. And you seem to you have survival on one hand, and then you seem to have elaboration on the other, that the city has these two sides.
Yeah, I think that'd be fair. I like the simplicity that you can build this structure from the most common materials. I mean, and I had this fantasy that these would be, built overnight in the streets of Beirut or something.
Right. Survival.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And it can be done without any machinery too. I think that's important. It's all done by manual labor, and that's what it looks
Right.
like now.
Right.
Because the color in the bags is totally incidental to me, and eventually, well, you can see the paper will all rot away, and there's imperfections too. You can see in the bottom right where, the cement and the gravel are quite mixed up, right? So, but it's fundamentally that thing will be there for a long time, I think. It weighs a lot too. I mean, it's about 30,000 pounds, I think. So it's.
So what's the difference between art and architecture in your work as you think about your use of architecture? And we were talking earlier about your being involved in even intervening in architecture, making architecture.
Well, like we were talking about, I think art and architecture are actually very symbiotic. I think they need each other. I used to be, I studied architecture a little bit in college, and I rejected architecture because I worked in an architectural firm one summer. And what I saw didn't, as a young man, it didn't inspire me because I saw people coming out of Harvard graduate school, and this firm that I worked for was literally, it was a 7-story building, and the partners in the firm were on the top floor, and then it was, like that. So the lowest people were down drawing toilet bowls on plans and stuff, and I was in the sub basement organizing old magazines. So it appeared to me that you had to be somewhere in your 50s before you got to make an architectural decision. of any consequence. So I don't think that's true, but I did then. And I could go to the sculpture department at Pomona College, and in 2 or 3 months I could make a sculpture and it would be finished. And I had total control over it. So that seemed a much more appealing route to go. But since then, I need architecture too, to use as a foil for my art and to keep the rain off my friends' paintings. Whoops.
It's true. I think also that you seem to continue to be investigating what those primary issues are. I watched as you, in thinking again, jumping ahead to urban light, as you had them assembled in a dense cluster in your studio, and then you considered several options, lines or clusters, and in essence what you created in front of the museum is architecture.
Yeah,
right?
no, I know. It's a building.
It's a building.
Yeah, with a roof of light.
With a roof of light.
Yeah.
And very specifically, and we'll look at some pictures later, it's like a temple. It is the museum temple in that sense. And it seems like each work you do wants to investigate that relationship further of that difference or that back and forth between the two. We're going to show, let's see, do we have we have a video I think we're going to show,
Are you
right?
going to show that now? Okay.
I think we're going to show of what my dad gave me.
Yes, this is the, this was a model skyscraper built out of rector sets, and there's about 1 million parts in this sculpture, and it's an odd scale because it's 65 feet high, so it's as tall as a real building. So it's got a, but it's actually a toy.
Right.
It's made out of 1913 erector sets that I produced out of stainless steel.
Why don't we,
Yeah.
oh, here we've got the, yeah, we can show the video on that.
There's drawing. This is the cage. It's in the. That's the cage it was shipped in. And this is on 5th Avenue, in front of the Rockefeller Plaza.
It does look like a toy at this.
It's not a model of the Rockefeller building. It's simply a poetic interpretation of every skyscraper. Yeah, it's these are all erector set pieces, and I had to have it engineered, but that was after the fact. We do our own engineering by wiggling and pushing and hanging. So
It was, when I saw it, it was uncanny because it is a toy. It's made of erector sets. It looks like a skyscraper. It looks, you can have certain vantage points where it fits perfectly into the city.
I know, like here.
Like right there.
And it's highly reflective. So it's got a certain dazzle to it that and the stainless steel part is what makes it sort of permanent. Nothing stains it or doesn't corrode. 65 feet.
65 feet. Now this does seem a kind of utopian image, right?
Yeah, no, it's an ode to all skyscrapers and to Manhattan, sort of, I mean. And the reason we made it that height was because we only had one night to install it in, and it was shipped across country as one piece. So I looked at it when we had it up temporarily out at Lakeview Terrace at the trucker's yard, and I took one look at it, and I realized we could have made it twice as tall. But we couldn't have, because we wouldn't have the opportunity to rejoin it into two separate pieces. We didn't have the time to do it. We had to ship it as one piece because we only had 6 or 7 hours to put it up. But this part is, it's really, you know, this film shows it better than a still photograph, because you can see how it's so active, sort of.
Now, all of these are partly the erector set pieces that you had to have specially made, remanufactured.
I remanufactured. They're copies. They're a reproduction of the original part. I've used the original part. The original part's actually used in the Hell Gate Bridge that you showed.
Right.
But those are from 1913. But I couldn't. They rust, and I couldn't get enough of them, so I decided to make my own.
Between the bridges, the skyscrapers, the other pieces that I've seen you make, it's as if you are creating some ideal city. You've got all the parts, and someday we're going to see them all reassembled
I hope
into
so.
one city. We'll have to find space for that. Really a beautiful piece. It was only up for
6 weeks.
6 weeks.
To the day, yeah. Whoa. It's not. Oh, it's all right. Here, I'll stick it out. That's good. Nobody tried to climb it, which I was really, because it's so fragile. You know, it would you could bend all the parts. It is in storage right now, in California. Sure.
We're thinking about that. Where would it go?
This is good. I like it when you can see through it. It has a certain transparency. I think this is the last time I've been. So you can actually. That's it.
Really beautiful. Really beautiful. So we were going to talk a little about the making of Urban Light, because this is not just this wasn't a fast project. This is a project that took a very long time, that you arrived at, I think, through collecting, right?
Yep. I didn't start off planning this. It wasn't something I planned to do. I've been shopping, you know, I go to Home Depot, Home Club, whatever it was, all those, you know, buying whatever, tape measures. And, you know, I always stop and look at these lamps, because, and they always have these sort of aluminum knockoffs made in China of old street lamps. And I was walking around at the Rose Bowl flea market with my friend Paul Schimmel and his son, and Max came running over and said, "Oh, you should check these out, Chris." And so I went over, and I saw two of these antique lamps kind of spread out like this in parts. And I knew right away they were the real thing, but I asked the man who was selling them, and he said, "Oh yeah, they're genuine, they're from the 20s. And he said, "If you buy them both, I'll give you a real good price, and I'll deliver them." I said, here's a check. Great. So he brought them out, and I said, "Do you have any more?" He said, "Yeah, I got 4 more like that." I said, "Well, okay, I'll buy those too." So he brought those out. And then over the course of a year, he had about 70 of them in his backyard. All in this kind of state, and component parts. So, you know, lugged them all up to my place in Topanga, lugged them up the mountain. And by the time I'd bought most of the ones in his yard, he'd saved some of the really big ones, the magnolias, he didn't want to sell me. But I turned to him, I said, do other people collect these lamps too? Because he had been collecting them for about 20 years. And he would go to the city when they were knocking them down, and it would be like going to pick apart. So the city didn't really care about them. Most of them got taken to landfill and thrown away. But he would go through all the broken parts and say there were 20 busted up lamps. Maybe by picking through the parts, he could salvage enough parts to make 3 whole ones or something. So he would lug them home, and he single-handedly moved all the stuff around. And he just gotten tired of being their caretaker. So when I asked him, I said, do any other people collect these? He said, why? Are you looking to buy more? I said, well, I might be. And then he confessed he had another 85 stored out in Pomona. So we went through the whole process of having them sandblasted, powder coated, all the hardware replaced with stainless steel or copper. It was a long process, and it was interesting. Jeff Levine loves these lamps, and he said to me, "I knew you would come someday." And I didn't mean, I took that as a compliment, really, because he had made this huge collection, and he really didn't want to sell them off in 2s or 3s to homeowners to have in their driveways. He realized that somebody else might, he was hoping that somebody would show up that would appreciate keeping his collection intact, which I was the guy. So, and I still buy things from him to this very day. He's a great collector himself, and he's still providing me with other goods. And through him, I met, there's a small group of sort of lamp aficionados. They're a small club. They've all known each other for 20 or 30 years, and they swap parts. And I met Steve and Anna Justice and Joe DeLurgio, and the Justices started getting me more lamps. And this is, I think, one of the most beautiful one. It's called the Broadway Rose.
Yeah.
And this is the head of it, and those are all rosebuds, and that's an artichoke at the finial. And these lamps have a very interesting history. Their finials are very, very long. That's the thing. And the reason for that is that these lamps were put in the teens. And for the first several years they were installed downtown. There's 6 of them in the urban light, and there's 11 of them left in Los Angeles. The reason for these long finials was that they predated the filament, the incandescent light bulb. They were a carbon arc. Yeah. And a carbon arc is 2 carbon rods that are spaced slightly apart. You put a high voltage, and there's a huge spark. So it was like the old days where the wick trimmer had to come. The adjuster for the carbon rod had to come every 2 or 3 days and crank the rod up to keep the gap, the right gap. So when you see streetlights with finials, those are all vestiges of a functioning finial, which initially these were. And that's why the finials were so long, was to house the carbon rod. And so, go ahead. Yeah.
It was 6 years of
collecting? Let's see, I bought the first one, and the first 2 I bought in 2000.
Yeah.
January of 2000. And yeah, 7 years. 7 years. Something.
And you assemble them.
Put them around my studio. But this is only 150.
Right.
And then
we had the 150 all set. Yeah. It looked like it would be a perfect piece. We were bringing them here, and of course, we were informed it wasn't. There weren't enough.
Well, because the plaza, Fred Hoffman said, you should walk down Ogden and look at the plaza from there. And I realized, this is a big, big space. It really needs as many as I can possibly get to fill it up. And I considered different possibilities, but when I was offered that plaza space, I thought this is the perfect spot. And so, and then I fooled around with the maquette. I think there's a picture of it.
I think there's a picture of the maquette. We have, this was, in fact, this is the way I saw the lamps. And I guess at that point, also just to say something that I know the Mock and Vienna had been interested in bringing
Yes.
these as a piece to Vienna. And it was actually Stephanie Barron, who was on our staff, said, you have to go up and see these lamps right away. And I remember hustling up to see them right away and being incredibly amazed by them and knowing that these had to be in Los Angeles because in so many ways they were the representation of the whole county, because each city
Had its own
had
separate-
responsibility to design their own lamps. So if you go and you see the different forms of the lamps, which you'll see, each was an expression of that city's design, art, public art. And you see here just some of the close-ups of the design. These are the Anaheim lamps, I think, or there's the Pasadena.
I think these are the Glendales, but
Glendales, that's right.
these are not swastikas. You have to remember that what had happened is that if you walk around Manhattan, you can see some of these same castings in storefronts as columns. So the local designers were trying to incorporate Southwestern motifs into the lamps. You have to remember this is in the 20s. So the swastika quote was part of Indian blankets and stuff like that. So that actually this is Southwestern. They're trying to make the lamps more Western,
Right.
as opposed to Eastern. So that, and
Yeah. They each have their very distinctive design, and of course, they've now created this image of their density. You always knew they needed to be dense,
tight,
right?
Yeah.
That was
Yeah,
clear.
you need a repetition of form too. It's kind of like lining up toy soldiers too, you know, where you get little columns of them. And I think the repetition works.
Assembling them was quite an enterprise for those of you who watched on Wilshire Boulevard, a team of people who you had gotten to know through this process, right?
Yep.
Assemble these.
These actually are the magnolias, the 14 magnolias. There's 16 of them now, but I showed them in London inside a gallery called the South London Gallery. So these are being test assembled before they're shipped to
yeah,
London.
I think I have a picture of that. Well, these are all obviously now in front of the museum on Wilshire Boulevard, and they
Yeah,
were,
the Urban Light. But these are the 14 magnolias inside the South London Gallery.
right, where they were shown as a group
Yep.
and are now here.
And then now incorporated into Urban Light. So and here's
the model.
Here's the model that I used. And
I have to say, when this model arrived, and we had looked at this space in front of the museum, and it was an instant eureka kind of moment, because here these lamps had been assembled into a building, into architecture. And when you walk through the lamps, as you know, they have this feeling of a Roman colonnade or some kind of ancient structure that, while they're from the 20s and they're modern in that sense, they have this feeling of walking through an ancient temple-like structure. And immediately, it seemed to me, this was the perfect image for the museum in Los Angeles, because steeped in the East Coast museums, and all of those East Coast museums, even to Chicago, will stand there with their Greco-Roman temple facades. That's the sign that you're walking into a museum, is that you have the temple facade. And of course, you think of that as being establishment. But of course, and this is a kind of faux temple, but the reversal is there, because of course those Greco-Roman temple facades are really faux. They're neo-classical, and here you've assembled an honest-to-goodness Los Angeles temple of our own materials, of our time, and of course we got our temple facade to make the entrance of the museum. It was just the perfect feeling for it.
How many lamps are there in all?
here,
202.
202.
Here's the layout and assembly. I should say something else, that we were on a very tight deadline for this, and I had just arrived and hadn't been here long, and of course construction was proceeding, and we were trying to change all this on the fly, and Vienna had articles in the paper about trying to raise the money to buy Urban Light, and it was one of those great stories where a trustee and his wife, Andy and Amy Gordon, agreed to have dinner, came up to see the lights in Topanga Canyon, and on very short notice, under urgent pressure, helped decide that they should be in Los Angeles. We acquired the piece, and I think began planning its installation right away. here it is going up. There are the bases you can see, and then there was the concrete prepared for the concrete pad. Let's see, I want to show, yeah, and there you see the lamps. And I want to say something about them because I just yesterday, as we were preparing the talk, I've noticed that people, I drive by the lamps at night, I'm here during the day obviously, and I see people all of the time getting out of their cars, even late at night, taking pictures of themselves in the lamps, taking pictures of the lamps, and it's become this incredible true landmark in Los Angeles. So I went on the internet the other day and just pulled up Flickr, which is the website where everybody posts their photographs, and just, not at random, I just picked a few. There were I think 600 entries that came up under burdened lamps, LACMA, and I think I tried one other search term, and there were literally hundreds and hundreds of images. So I just picked a quick selection, and I thought it would be fun to just show how the lamps have entered into our urban fabric right now. And this is a classic picture that you've probably seen. But these are just amazing pictures. People are out there every day making images. And this image, of course, in the new age of media and technology, this image of the lamps is going out all over the world, representing Los Angeles. This is a classic image. You'll see people getting out of their cars, lovers, taking pictures under the lamps at night. People have been fascinated by the details. These are the finials you were showing, and have made their own art photography, if you will, of these details of these lamps, and gone to great effort. In fact, I didn't show any video, but if you go onto YouTube and to other sites, you can find HD Steadicam home video that's made here, and entire scenarios of internet kind of TV series are being filmed around it. And interesting views that I think you hadn't even seen. I like this. Yeah, color. I mean, this is just a small sampling of an incredible variety of images that pop up around the lamps. Fog. Beautiful set that was in fog. So seeing these images, we were talking in the office last week, and I was talking with our photography curator, Charlie Cotton, and we've decided, I think, that we're going to work on our first citizen photography exhibition, where we're actually going to write to everyone, get their email address, write to them and ask them to submit some of these images, and hopefully in the next year we'll actually create an exhibition which will be curated, images of the lamps from photographers all around who've been photographing them in different ways, and we'll do video as well and offer some kind of prize and maybe a publication or something like that. I wanted to open it up to questions, and I wanted to ask one question to just start. First of all, to say you made a beautiful statement about these lamps when you put them up, and you said that you saw the lamps as a statement about what constitutes a sophisticated society, safe after dark, and beautiful to behold, which I thought was an incredibly beautiful statement. And I started thinking about it in the sort of history of all of your work, even going back to your performances, which I found so, people have written so much about those early performances, and they've even called them cold and without morality, and like you having yourself shot. And I actually had the exact opposite reading, that somehow all of your work, those works in particular, these works, have something to do with a sense of responsibility. That whether it's you as an artist investigating those phenomena or thinking about the urban environment, that there is some feeling of this sense of what a societal responsibility is. It seems to me that maybe the work has an arc that is held together, and I don't know if you can easily tie together some of these pieces about about a society, and you've made pieces about war, you've made pieces about weapons. Do you feel that there is something beneath that you can put your own finger on?
Well, I think it's about a lot of times imagining something and something you might reject out of hand initially, and then trying to look at the other side of the coin, kind of, and seeing. I don't know if that makes any sense, but I'll never forget seeing the miniature Vietnam Memorial, which was a miniature version that toured Mei Ling's memorial, the black granite thing. And I remember seeing it up in Santa Rosa, and it was just pieces of plexiglass leaned against plywood and stuff. And I kept looking at it, and thinking, there's something wrong here. Shouldn't the Vietnamese names be on the back of this thing? And so
That's right.
that's
You made a piece about that.
why I made the other Vietnam Memorial.
Right.
So I think there's I think there's often two ways to look at something.
And you seem to entice people into, by not knowing which side you're on some of those issues at first. And there are.
Actually, that's why, in some ways, I don't like the Vietnam Memorial that I made the other, because it's so
One side.
It's so didactic too.
Right.
And it's clear that I have a point of view. Whereas a sculpture like The Reason for the Neutron Bomb, where I displayed 50,000 little nickels with match heads to represent the Russian tank force, that was given as the reason why we had to make this atomic bomb that didn't really give it killed people, but it didn't have a blast. So that was a reason given by the U.S. government why we had to develop this weapon. And I just wanted to change the information physically, not the information, but to use a different media to look at it. Because I think a lot of times when you do that, you discover things just by changing the form. Because a lot of stuff we experience is abstract. So is 50,000 Russian tanks, is that a lot of tanks or not so many? Well, or is it 500? Or is it 5,000? Just a bunch of zeros. But when you see a physical model, it tells you something different.
Right.
So you could say, yeah, we really need to make the neutron bomb. That's a lot of tanks. Or what a terrible idea,
Right. Right.
So I think sometimes by just changing the nature of how the information is presented helps you learn something different.
And inquire about it
Yeah.
in a different way. Are there questions? I'm sure there are questions. Let's take a few questions. Yep.
Hello,
Yeah.
I'm
Hang on,
curious
we'll
regarding
go there.
the bridge that you have in the collection here.
Yes.
If that's the one that originally was made for the Stockholm Kunsthalle, the piece you
The
did in
Hell's Gate Bridge?
Stockholm that was made like an erector
Yeah, I
set.
showed it first at Magazine 3 in Stockholm.
Oh,
Yes,
okay.
that's correct.
So, thank you.
It was a question about the title?
The title of the skyscraper piece in New York?
Oh, what my dad gave me? Originally I wanted to call it a memorial for my dad because my father's passed away. He was an engineer, and I think he gave me sort of somehow the courage to do these things. And I was told, no, everybody will think he died in the 9/11 Twin Towers, but New York's very sensitive, so you call it a memorial, don't do that. So I came up with what my dad gave me, which what my dad gave me was, he didn't give me a million erector pieces. He gave me a good, he spent his hard-earned money sending me to good schools, so I got a good education. So that's what my dad gave me, and the result is that I can conceive of making a structure out of erector sets that probably nobody else has made.
For sure. Question here?
You're obviously a collector, not just of art, but those of us who collect things, how does that affect what you do? I mean, you take your collections and turn them into art, but there's still that process of collecting along the way and the finding and the searching
I don't know if everybody heard that. The question is about collecting and the obsession you have
Yeah.
with collecting and
Well,
what comes first.
When I first got out of graduate school, actually, one of the reasons I did performances because I was a way to keep making art and without having any tools or materials even. I mean, really, I could have all my work in my briefcase. And it was just a survival thing. But then over time, when I got slightly bigger studios and stuff, I did start collecting stuff. And a lot of stuff I collect comes to me. I don't really have to go out and get it. I mean, the lamps are an exception, but I never throw out a coffee can. Why?
Might end up in a
yeah.
work of art, like it often
Well,
does.
I don't know. I keep thinking that someday I'll make a big concrete column and I'll need all the coffee cans to be the forms for it. Or I've lived in Topanga at the place we have now for 25 years. No bottle has ever left the property. So it's a black hole for bottles. The problem is that, you know, you got to keep, kind of like the problem that Jeff Levine has, you have to keep caretaking this stuff. So the bottles go from the house into the old dog food bags. Then from the dog food bags, they go down the hill into the big bottle pile. So there's a whole, you know, there is, I slit the foil off every wine bottle in a certain way, because if you do it down the center and then around the rim, you can peel it off and get the whole foil intact, and it looks like little Ayatollahs. They look like little Khomeinis. So, you know, so I have boxes and boxes of those. You know, will I ever show them? I don't know. I mean, but they're. So you know, it's going to be a sea of Ayatollahs. That's my fantasy someday, is to have a room this big with, you know. Newspaper. I forbid the staff from recycling newspaper because I call it flatland. Why would you? You're getting all this free newsprint. Why would you give it back? I mean, so we have we have erosion because of streams and hills and stuff. So put the newspapers in the bottom of the creek bed to keep the erosion at bay. So, I mean, that's how the Beehive Bunker came about, was basically seeing these concrete bags that had hardened and thinking. So I think a lot of stuff, you know, comes to me. It's just it's about not discarding too, which, yeah, well, it is a form of recycling, yeah.
Maybe one more. Lynn.
Chris, did you ever actually change Taylor to City? You wrote that
So-
contract, did you add and subtract
So-
stuff over the years?
The question is, did he
yeah.
ever change, in fact, change Tale of Two Cities as the contract allowed
Yes,
for?
I did. I took a boat out called Miss Liberty, and it was installed, I think, about a year ago down at the Orange County Museum. I didn't actually go down to see it. I mean, sometimes you have to let things go, because I could, you know, obsess on it and go down and say, oh, you guys did it all wrong, and, you know, I didn't want to get into that. So, because someday somebody's going to have to install it when I'm not around, so they better start learning how to do it now. You know what I'm saying? It has to have a life beyond me being personally caretaking it. So I have taken things out, not very much. And I'm sure I would add things if I showed it again.